Perl scripting. In this nugget, we're going to talk about the scripting language Perl. Perl is a very elaborate scripting language in which you can implement everything from very simple tasks like we did with shell scripts to graphical user interfaces to network clients and more. We'll look at a few different Perl scripts and concentrate on a few of the topics that seem to give newbies difficulties. So pull up a chair and let's get scripting. All right, well, let's start by looking at a Perl script that I've written. I'm going to pull up my Emacs editor here, and this is a very simple Perl script. So let's talk about the structure of a Perl script as opposed to a Bash shell script, which we talked about in the introductory series. So a Perl script, again, starts with what's called the shebang, the sharp sign followed by the exclamation mark, and then it specifies the location of Perl on your computer. For me, it's in the user bin directory, which is very common for Linux systems. And then we have the -W option that we give to Perl on this first line, and that says to enable all warning messages. So anytime that you've done something that it might not be an error, an outright error, but there's a warning generated by the way you've done something as a little non-standard, then those messages will be printed out. A lot of times experienced Perl users don't like to see those because they know about the shortcuts that they're taking and the pitfalls that come with that, and they're just willing to they know that it's going to work, but even though there's going to be a warning message, that's why turning on warnings is a particular option that you have to set. Okay, so right away we see something a little bit different. Instead of using an echo statement, which is the shell script statement to print something out to the screen, we actually use a print statement. And inside of the print statement's double quotes here, all of this stuff will be printed out literally to the screen, except for this \n. That \n is a special character that represents a new line character or a carriage return or an enter, however you want to think about it. So what this will print out to the screen is, what is your first name, ? And then the cursor will go to the very next line. That's what the new line is going to force, okay? And then each line of Perl script here ends in a semicolon. So you can see each complete line of code ends in a semicolon. Again, that's a little bit different than the Bash shell scripting language. If you're used to programming in C or something like that, then you're used to that whole semicolon thing, okay? So then on the very next line, we set up a variable. So in Perl, we always preface the variable with the $sign. So here we say $name equals, and then this standard in expression there means that we're going to accept the input from standard in, which is, you know, what gets typed on the keyboard. All right, so the user will then be prompted for their name. And you can go ahead and type in the name. They could backspace and delete characters, add some more characters, and so on. And then as soon as they hit the enter key, then all of that stuff that they typed will go into the $name variable. Now, one nice thing about Perl, it has a lot of built-in functions, and that differentiates it from the Bash shell scripting language. So you can do a lot of things very simply in Perl, and one of the things that you're going to do an awful lot, because a lot of times what you do with Perl is you manipulate text files or you analyze text files and do things like that. It's very good at doing those sorts of tasks. And one of the functions that's built in is called chomp. And chomp takes away the new line character from the end of the variable name in this case. So when you typed in name, you typed in, like I type in Perry, and then I hit enter. Well, the $name variable right after I hit enter is equal to Perry and a new line character, and the chomp function takes away that new line character, so now name is just equal to Perry. Okay, once we're done that, then what I've done here is compute the length of the name. So I've created a variable called $len, and then I call this built-in function length, and then I pass it the $name variable, and you can guess what that does. It just returns the number of characters that are in the variable name. Okay, and then I do another print statement. So now my last print statement here starts with a new line character so that it gives a blank line of space, and then it says hello $name period. Your name has len characters period, and then I do another new line character. Okay, so a very simple Perl script that calls a couple functions, it takes some input, it does some print statements. Let's move out to, let's save this file, and then let's move out to the shell window and run this program. So the way that you run a Perl script is you say Perl demo.pl is the name of that script that we created, and that will run the Perl script. So I'll hit enter here, and it says, what is your first name? All right, so I could type all sorts of things here. I can backspace and retrieve it, and then I can type in my real name. I could, mess that up. I could go back and retrieve it. I could put in spaces. Okay, everything is legal. Okay, I'm just going to type my name and hit enter. And then it says, hello, Perry, period. Your name has 5 characters. Okay, so that's what we would expect to happen. All right, so let's run this again. So let me do it this way this time. Let me type Perry and then put a whole bunch of spaces, a couple tabs, things like that after my name, and then let me hit enter. And now notice it says, hello, Perry, and then it has all these spaces, period. Your name has 21 characters. So it's counting all of those spaces, the tab marks, and everything else as a character in the variable $name. That chomp function took off the new line character so that all of this is on one line. If I didn't do that, it would say hello Perry, and then on the next line it would say, your name has 21 characters. It would be the period, and your name has 21 characters on the second line if I didn't chomp off that new line character. But there's still all these spaces on the end. And the reason I'm doing this, I just want to show you how to manipulate strings in Perl, and the next thing that we're going to do is rip off those spaces off the end of the name. All right, so let's modify this Perl script that we just wrote to rip all the spaces and space characters out of the name, like spaces and tabs, for instance. Okay, so what I'm going to do still is I'm going to read in the name. I'm still going to rip off the new line character, but now I also want to take all the spaces out of the name. Now, the one way that I can do this is I can say name equals tilde. All right, so the equal sign with the tilde after it is an operator that you use on strings. All right, so what this is going to do is it's going to manipulate the string over here and then assign the manipulated string back to the value, back to the variable name. All right, and what we're going to do here is we're going to use a substitute operator. And the way the substitute operator works is you give an S, you follow that by a slash. I'm going to put a bunch of spaces in here. You follow that by another slash, bunch of spaces in here. I'm going to follow that by another slash, and I'm going to say G at the end to do it globally to the entire name. So don't just take out the first chunk of spaces, but take out every chunk of spaces that you see. So if I typed in Perry, space, 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 Fasano, space, 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 it would rip out the spaces in between Perry and Fasano and also after Fasano. Okay, now what do we put in between these slash marks? Well, what we're going to do here is basically what this is the first set of characters that we put in here is the thing that's going to be searched for inside of the variable name. And then the thing that we put in between these slashes is the thing that's going to get replaced. All right, so what do we want to search for? Well, we want to search for spaces, but we don't actually put the space character in here. We could, but we don't do that. There's a special character in Perl, \s, and this character represents all kinds of white space characters, spaces and tabs. So that first S is for a substitute. This \s here is for a special space character. Okay. Now, what we want to do is also replace these space characters. What do we want to replace them with? Well, we want to replace them with nothing. And so we're just going to leave the space between those two slashes empty. All right, put my semicolon at the end of the line, and that's going to modify the variable name. Now, let's just do this also, okay? Before I modify that variable name, let me just put in a print statement, something like you typed $name, period. Okay, and then I'll put a new line character there, double quotes and semicolon. Okay, so what I want to do using this print statement is it's just kind of a diagnostic print statement. I just want to make sure what the name looks like before I go and run this substitution operator on it. And then at the very end, I'll see what it looks like after I run the substitution operator on it, just to make sure that it's doing what I think it should do. Okay, so I'll save that. And then we'll go back out to the shell window and we'll run Perl demo again. So I hit enter and it says, what is your name? Let's just type name Perry and hit enter right off the bat. So it says you typed Perry, period. So we know there's no crazy characters after that. It says hello Perry, your name has 5 characters. Perfect. Okay, so let me run that again. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to type Perry. I'm going to put some spaces, some tabs, some more spaces and tabs, and then I'm going to hit enter. Now notice here it says you typed Perry. It's got all those spaces and tabs before the period. Okay, but then when it does that final print statement, it says hello Perry, periods immediately after your name has 5 characters. So it did strip off the spaces just like we thought it should. All right, well, here's a slightly more complex Perl program, and pretty much every line of this program is going to introduce something new to you. A lot of the stuff we saw at least a similar version of in the Bash shell scripting language back in the intro series, but I just wanted to introduce it to you in Perl because Perl's a little bit more powerful, and also the syntax is a little different. Okay, so let's just talk about what I want this program to do first. I want this program to look at all the files in /home/Perry, and I want it to tell me if any of the directories are world writable. Okay, so in other words, if I want to see if any of the directories have a permission of 777. Okay, so let's walk through this. The very first thing I do is set up a variable found, and I set it equal to 0. This is a very common trick in programming. We use a variable as sort of a flag, and when found is equal to 0, that means I have not found any of these kinds of directories with permission 777. If I do find one of those directories, then I'll set found equal to 1. Okay, and that will denote then at the end of the program when I go to test found, I can tell whether I found any of those directories by looking at the value of found. If found is 0, then I didn't find any of those directories. If found is equal to 1, then I did find some of those directories. Okay, so found is a flag that determines whether we found one of these world accessible directories. Now I set up this variable called files, and I set it equal to the result of doing this command at the command line. Now notice in Perl, if I'm going to run a shell command, I've got to enclose that command in backticks. That's one way to run a shell command. So what happens here is I type, basically what I'm doing is I'm running the ls command on the home Perry directory, and I'm putting the result of that command in this variable called files. Now you might notice that this variable files does not start with a $sign, but it starts with an @ sign. And the @ sign here represents that this variable is actually what we call an array. So think of it as a whole bunch of variables, a series of variables. So think of it this way also, like what is the output of ls-al? Like if we go back here and we're in my home directory and I do an ls-al on this directory, I get all sorts of stuff, right? I get lots of lines of output, and each line is one variable. Okay, think of it that way. And then that array of files, that variable files that's set up as an array, contains each of these, and each line is one variable in files. Okay, so think of it that way for right now. Okay, so let's cd back into scripts here so that when we run the program we'll be in the right directory, and let's go back and continue analyzing the Perl script. The next thing that the script does then is it loops through each of the files that gets printed out from the ls command. All right, and the way that we do that is with the for each command in Perl. So we saw loop structures in the Bash shell scripting language. I think we looked at the while loop structure, which looped and continued to do commands as long as some expression was true, as long as some test was true. Okay, well what we're going to do here with the for each command is similar. We're going to keep executing the stuff inside of the for each loop, which is this if statement, for every element of the array files, for every single variable that's in that array files. And what are the variables in that array files? Each line of output from the ls command. Okay, each time I loop through one of these things, I set the variable $entry to be that particular file, to be a different file from the array files. So what this does is the very first time through, $entry is equal to the first file listed by ls. All right, so $entry is the first file listed by ls. Then I run this if statement. So let's look at this if statement. The if statement says if $entry is equal to a result of this regular expression. We saw a regular expression in the last Perl program, and we did a substitution with that regular expression. Here what we're doing is we're doing a matching with the regular expression. That's what the M stands for. So what I'm looking for is, does this variable $entry that was the first listing from the files that was created from the ls command, does that variable have a match to drwx, rwx, rwx? Meaning, does it have a directory that has 777 permissions? Okay, that's the only time this string would come up inside of those entries. Okay, if it does, then I would print out to the screen. I would say you have a directory accessible to everyone, and I would also set the variable found to 1. Remember, found was our flag, and when it was equal to 0, that meant we hadn't found a world accessible directory, and when I set it to 1, that means we have found a world accessible directory. Okay, so that's what's going on inside this loop. Every time through the loop, I run this if statement. So say the very first entry from the ls command did not match drwx, rwx, rwx. Well, then the stuff inside of the if statement, namely this stuff, is skipped, and then we go back up to the top and we take the next entry out of the array files. So now we have $entry is equal to the second element or the second file listed by ls. Okay, now what happens? We do the exact same if test again. We're looking for rwx, rwx, rwx. If we don't find it, then we go back up to the top and we take the next entry out of files and do the if test again on that entry, and so on. And we continue this until the array files is empty, until we've tried every single element that was listed by the ls command. Okay? Then, after the loop is all over, after we've exhausted our whole list of files, then what I do at the very end is I test the value of found. I say if $found is equal to 0, and to test equality, to test whether something is equal to 0, you use the double equal sign in Perl. Back in the Bash shell scripting language, we use like an EQ represented equality, and in Perl, we use double equals. Now you might say, why would I use double equals? Why don't I just use single equals? Well, single equal sign in Perl means that you're assigning a value, like right here. Here, when we use single equals, we're assigning the value 0 to the variable found. And here, we don't want to change found, we just want to test it. And so the way that we test variables in Perl is we use double equals. So we say if found double equals 0, then print out and say there was no world accessible directories in home Perry. One last thing to look at here is notice how I had to print out home Perry here to make it print out inside of a print statement. If I just said /home/Perry, it would get confused. It would be like, wait, no, the slash character means something else. So I have to escape the slash character with the other slash. So here I'm using the escape slash character, which we use for like /n, which we used before for /s to represent spaces back in the last program. So here this will print out /home/Perry, and those the escape slashes will not be printed in the print statement. Okay, so let me save this. Let's go back out to the shell window here, and let's run demo2.perl. Okay, so here it says there are no world accessible directories in /home/Perry. Let me do a little change here. Let me do a change mod 7077, and I'll change something in that directory. Let me change my public HTML directory. So I'm going to change that to 777, and now let me run perl demo2.pl, and now it says you do have a directory accessible to everyone. So you can see how that works depending on the values of my permissions of my directories. Another element of Perl that confuses new Perl programmers is quoting. So I want to go through a few little examples here and just talk about quoting and what the effects of single quotes and double quotes and backticks and all the different kinds of quotes are. All right, so let's use this very simple example here to illustrate the difference between the different kinds of quoting in Perl. First, I'm setting up a variable called $name, and I'm setting that equal to Perry. And notice I put Perry in double quotes. That assigns the characters Perry to the variable name. Okay, now I do a print statement, and I've just done print statements like print 1, print 2, print 3, print 4, so that we can see in the output exactly which one we're talking about so we don't get confused. So I print 1, and then I do a \t. That's a tab, and that just is a special character in Perl, just like \n is new line, \t is a tab character. All right, so in the next print statement, which will occur on the same line as the number 1, since I didn't put a new line character in that first print statement, I print inside of double quotes $name/n. So when $name appears inside of quotes, then that $name, that variable, gets expanded to its actual value. So what will get printed here is a 1 followed by a tab, followed by Perry, because that's the value of the variable name, followed by a space, followed by a new line character. Okay, so that's what the first thing prints out here. The next pair of print statements prints out a 2 followed by a tab. Then the next print statement here prints $name, comma, then double quotes /n double quotes. Okay. This print statement here looks a little different. $name is not in double quotes. That's okay. A print statement can print just the value of a variable by just saying print $name. If I also want to include special characters like /n or /t, those need to be inside double quotes. So really this print statement is printing out two things at the same time. One of those is $name. The comma distinguishes between the first thing it's printing out and the second thing. And then the second thing it prints out is the special character new line, but that has to be in double quotes. You couldn't print /n without the double quotes. You would get some sort of an error. Okay, so actually the first pair of print statements and the second pair of print statements prints basically the same thing, Perry followed by a new line character. Now the next pair of print statements does something a little bit different. I print a 3 followed by a tab, but on the next line I print $name, but I print it inside of single quotes. Now single quotes print out what's inside of the single quotes in a literal fashion, meaning that the name is not expanded. The variable name is not expanded. This is not the variable name. This is just a sequence of characters $name. It never gets expanded because it's inside of single quotes. The double quotes here are again used to print out a new line character, and so this line will print 3 followed by a tab, followed by a $name, followed by a new line character. Okay. On the fourth pair of print statements here, I print out a 4 followed by a tab. On the next line, I'm using double quotes again. But notice this time I'm using a $, prefaced by the escape slash, the same slash that we use for n, that we use for t, that we used in the last program to print out an actual slash, okay, like a for directory. All right, so here what I'm saying is print out this, but by preceding that $, by the escape slash, then that $, is not interpreted as its real meaning in Perl, which is, you know, how it precedes a variable. That's what $, is used for. So this says ignore that special meaning, just take it as a literal character. So again, this one prints 4 followed by a tab, followed by a $name, followed by a new line character. Okay, so really the first two pairs of print statements print basically the same thing, and the next two pairs of print statements print basically the same thing, but they're just different ways to do it. And remember, that's Perl's motto. There's more than one way to do it, okay? And pretty much anything you do in Perl, somebody else could write a Perl program that does exactly the same thing, and the Perl program could look completely different. And the very last thing I've done here is use the backtick character. We learned about the backtick character in the last program where we did an ls command and we assigned that to a variable. Well, here what I want to do is I just want to print out the contents of the etc password file. But if I didn't use a print statement here and I just printed them out, well, that would get printed out, but it wouldn't get printed out to the screen. The cat command would be executed, but there would be no results printed to the screen. So to get things to print to the screen from a particular Linux command, you have to precede that by the print statement. All right. And so that's all the different kinds of quotings: double quotes, single quotes, and backticks. Let's just go out to the screen here and run that Perl program. So we'll have a demo quote is what I called that Perl program, and we'll run it, and you can see here, let's scroll up. So 1 was Perry, 2 tab Perry, 3 tab $name, 4 tab $name, and then the contents of the Etsy password file was printed out. One last thing I want to do with regards to Perl is just talk about Perl from a system administrator's perspective. Like I said before, Perl is a very elaborate scripting language, and one of the things that makes it so all-encompassing is that it has all these different modules out there that you can install on your system. Okay, and as a system administrator, you might have to install some of these modules at some point. And let me just show you the easiest way to go about that. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to run the Perl command with the mcpan directive, or mcpan option -e shell. Now, the very first time that you run this, you're not going to get the cpan prompt right away. What you're going to get is this whole series of questions. Answer no to auto-configure, and then go through and answer all the other questions that it gives, like, you know, where's the location of your Perl script? Where is the location of your make program? And all this other kind of stuff. How do you want things set up? Okay, and once you get all that stuff set up, then later when you go into this script like this, you're just going to get the cpan prompt. Now, from the cpan prompt, you can do all sorts of things. You can inquire about certain packages. It'll tell you what modules are part of that package and things like that. Okay, you can also try to install certain modules. For instance, if I say something like install io : string on my system, well, then what it does is it says, okay, it looks out there and it says, okay, io : string is up to date, so I don't have to worry about that. I know I have the latest version out there. If I want to install something that's not there, maybe I want to install the image : info package. Okay, so if I do that, then now notice what it's doing is it's going out and it's actually fetching that package, and it's going to come back and add that into my Perl system so that later someone else who's writing a Perl script can include the image : info program into their Perl script. Okay, and they will get all of the functionality of that particular module, image : info. Okay, so it went through and it did all of these installations for me to set up all these various things. Okay, so this is a really nice way to add modules to Perl, and it makes the life of a system administrator very easy. Well, let's wrap up our nugget on Perl scripting now. We talked about some of the very basics of Perl scripting. We talked about variables. We learned how to store values in variables like $name to hold a string of characters like PERRY, for instance. We talked about other variables like $found that held numbers like 0 and 1. And then we learned about more complicated variables like @files here, and that was an array of variables or a collection of variables all referenced by one name. And then we talked about control structures in Perl. We looked at a simple if statement. We also used a for each loop, which was perfect for manipulating the elements of an array. And then we talked about some simple regular expressions. The one script we used a substitute operator, where we substituted one particular set of characters for another set of characters. And in that particular example, we substituted blank spaces and tabs with nothing. Okay, we just eliminated them from a particular string. We also used a regular expression match operator, where we matched a string of characters, and we used that inside of an if statement, and then we took action according to whether we found a match for that particular set of characters. Regular expressions are one topic in Perl that is much more deep than what we got into today, and that's something I encourage you to look at if you're trying to do substitute or match operators for more complicated strings of characters. And then finally, we talked about quoting. This is something that gives new Perl users just headaches. And so we talked about the difference between double quotes, between single quotes, and then between the backtick quotes. Remember that the backtick was what we used to execute shell commands inside of a Perl script. And finally, we talked about adding modules so that as a system administrator, you can add modules to your system so that other Perl programmers or yourself can have access to these modules from within inside of a Perl script. And last, I just want to recommend, there is no single site out there that I could recommend for you to learn Perl from. The number of websites that have example Perl scripts and Perl tutorials and tutorials on regular expressions are immense. I mean, the number of books and scripts and web pages that are out there, it's just in the millions, okay? Perl really has like a cult following in the Linux and computer science community. And a lot of people that are into Perl really like to share their knowledge. There's lots of user groups with Perl all over the country and the world. In Seattle, there's a really active, what they call SPUG, the Seattle Perl Users Group. And they meet once a month, and I think every third or fourth month, they devote to new users. So they try to bring people into the Perl community by showing them some of the cool things that you can do with Perl. So if you're at all interested in Perl, I encourage you to go out and learn some more about it. But in the meantime, thanks for watching this nugget, and I hope you found it informative.